Hey everybody, welcome to Sex is Medicine. I am your host, Miss Devi Ward Erickson, and I am delighted to have you here for another juicy, delicious, and enriching episode of the number one resource for holistic sex education on the internet, online. I am blessed and delighted to have an alumni of Sex is Medicine here again, Rachel Maddox, not to be confused with Rachel Maddow. And Rachel is someone that I admire very, very much. She is a trauma resolution educator, author, coach, and guide who has helped hundreds of humans move from sexual, complex, or developmental trauma into pleasure, power, and trust-filled relationships. She is the author of Secret Bad Girl, a sexual trauma memoir and resolution guide, and that is why she was on our previous show. And she's recently going to be publishing soon, a book called ReBloom, a soulful system for post-traumatic growth in sex, love, and society. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you so much for having me back, Devi.
Yeah. It's a delight. So I admire your work so much. So before we dive in, could you give us a little review of how you started this work in trauma resolution and healing?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And I do think, as I have these conversations with people, I think hearing the story helps because I'm not just some random scholar.
Mm-hmm.
My career path was really more like a calling that was rooted in my own personal life experience, like so many healers, I do think.
Yeah.
And I'll also just mention that I'll be mindful about how much I share. And if at any point this conversation sounds or feels a little bit overwhelming, just know you can pause because I know we're in the realm of trauma and that can be like sensitive and tender. We'll move as slowly as we can. We'll invite breaths here and there. And I always just like to say that at the beginning because I know sometimes people press play on a podcast like this with a little bit of fear and trepidation, but no worries. We'll be as safe as we can be.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for me, I, like many people, experienced sexual trauma at a pretty young age and had a lot of shame around it and a lot of secrecy around it and a lot of like not even knowing if it was bad or if it was just normal, right? Because we live in a rape culture. I just felt like, well, okay, so I was raped when I was young by someone much older than me. Big deal, right? And then I ended up getting into a pretty sexless marriage relationship from like 18 to 25. And that felt like such a relief on my system. But as I started to do more healing in my mid-20s, my sexuality began to wake up. And I realized that this person who I had partnered with specifically because there wasn't a lot of sexual energy there. And that felt really safe for me. And so we ended up parting ways. And sex was one of the reasons. There were many reasons, but it was one of the reasons why things weren't going to continue forward for us. And at that point, I'm in my mid-20s and I ended up being date raped twice. I remember thinking and feeling like, wow, I thought that was just something that happened because I was young and stupid, not because maybe there's something else going on. Maybe I don't have a sense of sexual agency or empowerment or choice. But of course, I still ignored it because it was very scary. And I'm like, I'm 25. And at that point, people weren't really talking about trauma. Like this conversation around sexual empowerment and sexual trauma is so much louder and more in the public sphere than it was at that time. And so I really ignored it. I was very afraid. And I ended up developing vulvodynia, which was chronic pain in my vulva. And then I ended up developing vaginal melanoma, which was cancer. And I had cancer on my clitoral hood and I had a surgery and it was a very, very intense experience. And through that experience, plus a few other, like, again, re-traumatizations, smaller sexual harassments and things like that, I started to realize, okay, something is trying to get my attention, whether it's my own soul, whether it's God, whether it's my body, something is saying, pay attention now, because this problem's not going to go away unless you start to pay attention to it. And at that point, sort of desperate, I reached out to like my network and I was like, what would you do if you knew somebody with maybe this thing called sexual trauma, right? And people said, oh, you should look up a somatic experiencing practitioner. And so I Googled that, and I ended up finding somebody that was near me at the time. I was living in Maryland, and her name is Bridget Vixens. And she was my one-on-one trauma resolution practitioner. And she also had a training program called Alchemical Alignment, which is a body-based trauma resolution and embodiment of spirit training. And so I went to Bridget for almost 40 sessions in person. And I did a very deep and thorough, like, all right, I'm going all in process. And I also went through her training program 1.5 times. But right at the very beginning of our work together, after only 3 sessions, I thought, like, I had the experience. I had pushed her against the wall, you know, we had some kind of boundary thing we were doing. And then I was back on the table, and I was kind of integrating and digesting the experience I had. My nervous system was rearranging. I was having this like mystical experience of more of my body coming online. And I could see and feel before me this like red carpet roll out. And it was like, in my mind's eye, it was my destiny. And it felt very cheesy, or it feels kind of cheesy to say, but it was really true. I could just see that it wasn't even, it had nothing to do with competition or other people or comparison. It was just like, here is a path that you're meant to walk. And that path was around educating about trauma and what it is and how it works, and working with people who have trauma. But I specifically was seeing this gap, especially in the coaching industry, where people are really approaching things cognitively, or maybe emotionally, but not necessarily somatically, which means of the body and of the nervous system. And I was seeing this gap between the approach, also like a force-based approach, or a pressure or a rushing-based approach, or even like this, how quickly can you manifest, and how quickly can you change your mindset, versus the more trauma-informed somatic approach of how deeply in consent with your own body's wisdom and your own soul's inherent treatment plan for healing. How consensually can you go through that process? And just noticing my own experience between the two, and how drastically more efficient and transformative the slow and consensual path was. Which is a little bit counterintuitive. So I thought, okay, someone's got to do this. No one was doing that in the coaching industry at the time. It was pre Me Too. And I was like, I'm doing this. This is my call. And so I got on that path. I wrote my first book, Secret Bad Girl. I've worked with hundreds of people, both individually, one-on-one, in groups. And then I started having people asking me, will you please like train me? Other coaches who were my clients or whatever, will you please start a training program? And I was like, no way. That is very intimidating. And this is not a topic to take lightly. But with enough kind of requests, I was like, well, maybe I can kind of feel this out and do something with a small group, which I did. And I kind of betaed the possibility of starting a training program. And then this year, actually 2020, I started the ReBloom coach training, which is a trauma resolution coach training program for advanced coaches, therapists, and practitioners. So people who already have either a lot of experience in the field or other certifications, who want to be able to work with trauma safely and soulfully.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so necessary. And that is something that kind of like is like nails on chalkboard for me about the coaching industry. Like you're going to bully yourself into healing or bully yourself into transformation. And it's so like when I used to participate in that pre-understanding about trauma, I would just re-traumatize myself and end up feeling like I was broken or there was something wrong with me because I couldn't just shift my mindset and get over my stuff, right? And the understanding that trauma lives in the body, and that we have to unlock it and release it from our actual cellular tissue was so, it just felt like a warm embrace. It's such a different path, a path of compassion versus a path of force, right? And it's like the difference between coming from the head, transformation as an intellectual concept, and transformation as an embodied experience.
And we can use our minds as allies, right? We can get our minds on board to help us. You know, for example, we can use our minds to help us come more into the present. We can use our minds to help understand why working with our bodies and working in consent with our bodies is transformative. We can use our minds to help us get into the place where we can do the body work. And then after the body work happens, we can use our minds to help integrate
Yeah.
create a new pathway forward.
Yeah.
But it's like when we skip over that, the deeper realms, and
Yeah.
then exactly shame ourselves or get shamed by others for not having a deep and sustainable transformation, it's just too bad, you know?
Yeah.
We don't deserve that. We've been through enough.
Exactly. I love that. I love that. Such a compassionate approach and so deeply needed. Yeah. So let's talk about sex.
Let's do it.
So we're talking about reblooming our sexuality. And one of the things that you shared is that most people focus on sex to try to grow healthier sexualities. But what if focusing on worthiness, receptivity, healthy boundaries, and sharing our hearts are the real secrets to mind-melting bliss? So what is the connection between worthiness and healthy boundaries and awesome sex?
Basically everything. Right?
Open-ended question.
So basically everything. Yeah, so I'll just back up a moment and say that in ReBloom, there are these 7 archetypes, and I'm not going to go into all of them in depth or anything like that, but they go through a developmental path. Developmental meaning they start at the very beginning of life and move through into a more mature phase. And the first archetype is our soul seed, and it connects your belly, your umbilical cord, your stomach. And it's the place where you first came into life, where the soul, right, your formless self, and your seed, the matter of your body, combined and came into your mother's womb. Now this relates to sex. Get ready. Hold on. In your mother's womb, ideally, at a blueprint level, at the level you were designed for, you were able to receive everything you needed. Yeah. Effortlessly. Right? You were in this protective space and you were being fed and you were hopefully being nurtured. And there was a sense of like, wow, I have everything I need. I don't even have to ask for it. This is amazing. And then you're born and that umbilical cord is cut and you come to your mother's chest. And what do? You feel that disconnection of like, wow, I have everything I need. I don't even have to ask. And you realize, oh no, now I feel that I need something. And I have to ask for it. I have to cry for it. And then again, ideally, you receive what you need. And what you're needing in that moment is to be held. What you're needing in that moment is to receive nourishment. What you're needing in that moment is this sense of I'm cared for, I'm protected.
Love.
I'm loved.
Yeah, core need.
Yeah, core need. And so even just right here, we might pause because there are probably people listening who know something about their birth story and they're like, wait, that didn't happen like that for me. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. But it's possible that that connects to your sex life. Yeah. Because that core essential capacity to be able to feel that you have a need and then to be able to ask for that need to be met and then to be able to receive the need as it gets met. Those 3 functions are all related to our earliest moments of being alive. Right? That's not a cognitive thing. Yeah. But we can grow our capacity to feel our needs, ask for our needs, and receive our needs if somehow those things are shaky. But if you've been struggling with like, you know, that feeling, I'm sure you know this, where you're like in bed, you're next to your partner, and you're like sitting there thinking, please turn over and kiss me and tell me I love you. Tell me you love me. Please turn over, kiss me and tell me you love me. Like so maybe you're feeling the need, but you're frozen in being able to speak it. Yeah. And then maybe he does it, but because you had been frozen around speaking it, you're gruff and you can't even receive that it's coming. Yeah. Yeah. Right? So these core developmental capacities to be able to sense, this is what I need. I need this, and it's okay that I need this. I'm worthy of needing it. And I can speak what I need and then I can receive it. These are really deep wirings. Yeah. And if we're stuck in any of those places, it's going to stifle our capacity for intimacy and connection. So maybe I'll just start there.
Yeah, that's so as you were going through that description of those 2 different stages, what comes to mind for me is infant male circumcision. Oh, that interruption of that moment, that, infant mother bond and that interruption and how devastating that is for so many people. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. How devastating that is from that that moment of the bonding. And then also it's obviously a form of genital mutilation. So
Yeah.
you're being pulled away from the sense of like, I'm held, I'm cared for, I'm allowed to want and need. I love that you brought this up too, because if women think that they're stifled around this, male-bodied people, how desensitized are they to the need for love and connection and being held and nurtured?
Yes.
And what does that do to our culture as a whole?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And the violence that ensues from that disconnection.
Yeah, it's very big.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, these are such salient points because it's like going to the root. We have all this stuff arising in society, right? Before we started the episode, we were talking about like what's going on in the world and how divisive it is and all this pain and all this anger. And yet at the core and the root of that are those two steps right there that you just outlined, and any potential interruptions right there, and how those are magnified and the butterfly effect translate then into our lives as adults, and all that core wounding that's never resolved and is on display right now on a planetary or global level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what happens if more of us can resensitize? Because here's the thing. This core, this archetype, soul seed, all of the archetypes, they have a hyper expression of the wound and a hypo expression. So I would call the core wound here neglect.
Yeah.
So we've got worthiness and receptivity as the blueprint, neglect as the wound. The hyper, when you've experienced neglect, is either I'm going to be hyper self-sufficient. I'm going to take care of everything. I'm going to get all my needs met by myself. So I'm not going to ask you for the intimacy and the tenderness that I need. I'm going to instead eat.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to instead overwork. Or I'm going to instead have an affair, which would be a kind of riff off of hyper self-sufficiency into deviance, hyper deviance. I'm going to get my need met in some unsafe place. Which, I mean, look at our culture. Our culture is built on, I'm going to just, because I can't ask for the love and intimacy I need, I'm going to make money in weird exploitative ways. I'm going to try to amass a sense of safety and belonging in shallow, hollow ways.
Or I'm going to be addicted to pornography because I'm afraid of
porn.
My needs to my partner.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got that hyper self-sufficiency. I'll take care of it by myself because it's too vulnerable to feel that I need something, to ask for the thing and to receive it. And the vulnerability could be a frozenness, right? It could be like, right, like where I was describing, I'm in bed and I'm hearing the voice, but it can't come out of my mouth, which is a thing that happens for me. And I like to go like this when that happens. Hi, I have a little thing I'm trying to say that I can't say.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Got to try something, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the hypo response to neglect, which is self-denial. I don't have any needs. I can't even feel my needs. What are you talking about? Needs? Who? Me? No, I don't need anything. I don't need love and sex to connect. I don't need to feel honored and valued before my body is engaged. I don't need that. I just need pleasure.
Yeah.
Or I don't need sex. I've got this nice, safe relationship. I don't need sex. Right? So we have certain needs that just actually become invisible. Because they've been neglected for so long or at such a deep or early stage.
Yeah, that makes so much sense and so clearly outlined. So, and I've read Healing Developmental Trauma, and I love how like the way you describe it and explain it is so concise and clear and practical and accessible. Right? That's a very, very heady book. I had to read it like 3 times. I love it. But at the same time, it's so like intellectual and academic that it's hard to relate to sometimes, right? So I love the way that you're sharing these different stages of human development and how these interruptions cause soul wounds. Yeah,
totally. I know that's one of my goals too. I was reading all these like trauma books written by white dudes, and I was like, all right. And they're all scientific and I'm like, can we tell some stories? Can we get some like soul up in here? Can there be poetry? Like, come on. We need this to feel accessible and digestible. So that's definitely something I'm passionate about. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love that. So being a coach and a healer myself in the realm of Tantra, and of course, inadvertently encountering trauma. My own story of wanting to do the work that I do stems from my own healing of my own sexual, spiritual, racial, generational trauma through these methods.
Yeah.
And I'm always hungry to learn more about how we can be even more effective in the work that we do in supporting our students and our clients and our teachers. So what are the top 3 things that we as coaches need to know when we're working to support people who have had sexual trauma?
Yeah. I think one of the first things, and this kind of goes back to the first question that you asked, is that if you just work with the sex, you're missing the whole soil of the situation. So if somebody comes to you and they're like, I can't orgasm with my partner and da, 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 and you don't inquire about what's going on with their sense of their ability to feel, speak, and receive their needs, or what's going on with their ability to feel safe saying no and setting healthy boundaries, or what's going on with them being able to express the truth in their heart. If we don't actually go below the story of sex into the midline of receptivity, sovereignty, and whole self-expression, then that similar thing that we were talking about where like the mindset approach and you end up feeling shame, like ashamed that you couldn't figure it out. The same thing happens a lot in sex where you're like, well, I'm doing all my jade egg practices and I can't figure it out. What's wrong with me? And it's like, this is really not about sex. This is about your sense of, am I safe to be who I really am?
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for that, because I've worked with some students who have done other coaching with other sex educators who are like, yeah, this is what it looks like to be sexually empowered. And then they're working with me and they're like hitting into their core wounding and they're like, I don't feel sexually empowered. And I'm like, awesome. That you don't have to be. You're like, you're healing. Be present with this. It doesn't look any way. Like you're trying to look like the way it's supposed to look, as opposed to actually being present with what's alive and what's true inside of them in that moment. So that's so, wow. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. And I really believe that like healthy sexuality blooms from the roots, from the roots up. It's not from the top down. And so even in the ReBloom archetypes, I talk about sex as the 6th archetype. So there's 5 other, we have worthiness and receptivity, sovereignty, which is healthy boundaries, whole self-expression, clarity and choice, empowered safety and vitality, before we get to intimate belonging. And intimate belonging, actually, as an archetype, the pollinator, it's connected, it's sex, but it's also about lineage. It's also about belonging to other people and community and culture. It's about, am I safe to mix and mingle as who I really am? And the problem is we try to get to that mixing and mingling before we know who we really are, because we're in a society that has stripped us from deep connection to who we really are and to what we're really meant to do. And so I think that's one of the first things I would say is like, it ain't about sex. It's about everything else. First. Sex naturally flowers. We are meant to be sexual creatures. Even people who, you know, identify as more asexual, there's still parts of us that have eroticism or sensuality or your own version of life force. That is absolutely natural, and it will absolutely emerge in safe conditions.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing, is having this container of safety to allow what is inherent to arise.
Yes. Exactly.
Beautiful.
So I guess on that point, the second thing I would say is, how can you create consensual containers where you really empower your students and your clients to say no as often as they want and as much as possible, and where no is celebrated. Especially in a culture, again, where, you know, we're put through these school systems that feed us into, you know, the capitalist machine. And it's all about, were you obedient? Did you follow the rules? Did you check the boxes for a system that's going to extract from you in the end? What the fuck? So how can we not do that in our sexual healing spaces, right? How can we say, you know what? I hate to tell you this because this is going to kick up against all of your socialization, but there is no checkbox for you to get to your sexual healing. Sorry, Instead, and this is something I say in all of my classes and, you know, with all my students, but also all my clients, but especially if like we've got a workshop or something, I say, hey, you know, we've got the next 4 days together. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's one thing I want you to learn, which is to not override your body.
Yes.
It is the underlying lesson of the whole 4 days. And so if that means you need to skip a half of a day because you're saturated, skip that half of the day. And it doesn't mean you lost half the day. It means you earned your sovereignty, which is the most valuable lesson you can ever learn anywhere.
Yes.
That no one else can be in charge of your body and the choices that you make.
Mm-hmm.
And that right there usually changes people's lives. They're like, whoa, someone just not only told me I could say no, but really encouraged me. And I'll also often challenge people, I dare you to sit something out. Where you have like a maybe and you would usually push, sit it out. And that's often also very appreciated.
I love that. And I love that you brought up the rest, because that's a component in healing that we're often not cognizant of. My experience is when I'm doing a lot of deep repair and deep healing, I'm tired. I need rest. You know, if my practice is working, like if I'm like, yes, I'm doing my Tantra meditation, blah, 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 and I'm working, guaranteed after a few sessions, I'm going to be like, okay, I need to rest now. I need to not do anything for a period of time and just integrate and just rest and be instead of do. And that is an aspect that is really, I find is not accounted for very often in these spaces of healing and growth, is that as we heal, we need to repair.
Yeah, right. Just like working out the muscles, then you've got to do all the repair on the muscles.
Exactly. Yeah. Which takes rest and energy.
I love that.
Right?
I love that. I'll often joke with people, especially if I am having somebody come into a one-on-one container. I'm like, I just want you to know you're going to need to take way more naps. Do you have time for that?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Schedule that in. Plan that. Yeah.
So those are the two things that are kind of up right now. I don't have a third one bubbling around in my psyche in the moment, but we could always, I'm sure something else will come through.
Yeah. Well, those are very, very rich and very, very important for all of us to hear as coaches and healers. And, you know, given the statistics, 1 in 4 yoni owners has experienced some form of sexual trauma or sexual abuse. Like, that is a huge demographic. The 2 of us here on the screen, you know, have experienced sexual trauma. So it's a huge demographic of people. You know, the assumption in my mind is assume if there's not overt trauma, there's societal trauma.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everybody's got trauma.
Yeah.
This was a bad idea, but it was funny. It entertained me. I was like, I think I should make a t-shirt that says, everybody's got a little trauma-rama. But the thing is, like, why would somebody want to wear that shirt? I don't know, but I just like it as a phrase. Everybody's got a little trauma-rama.
Well, kind of, you know, is bringing some humor to a very intense situation.
Yeah.
Right. And then still, you know, when we talk about trauma in the society, it's always like Vietnam War or a car crash.
Right.
Right. We're so not trauma informed as a society, to how subtle and how intricate it really is.
Yeah, totally. I think too, on this note around rest, maybe a third piece I would say is, as a coach, as a guide, as a teacher, less is more.
Yes. Thank you.
Again, we're in this culture that teaches us to be extractive and commodify everything, and everything's about how far did you get and how quick did you get there. But I think especially with healing really deep, especially with the nervous system, you know, the nervous system prefers homeostasis. It prefers to stay as it is. It doesn't prefer change. And so if you can make even a 1 degree change slowly, that's going to be more effective to a sustainable shift in your client or in your student than if you make a 5 degree shift quickly, because it'll just go back. It'll resist that change.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you create doability? You know, one of the main words in all the field of trauma resolution is titration, which is about doing the smallest doable bit at a time, because you really don't know what someone's bringing into your space or how intense it might be. And it's always better to just slowly work your way in, as opposed to trying to push or rush for results. And especially as a coach or a teacher, there can be this like pressure, like I have to deliver or perform this transformation for this person, which 1 is codependent and 2 is not true. And really trusting that if I respect and honor this person's body intelligence,
Yeah.
and if I really emphasize that less is more, and the slower we go, the deeper the change will be, your clients will get a lot from that.
And I love that. Something really just stood out to me. Honor the wisdom of the body, because that's what we teach as well. And it's such a different path from this patriarchal imprint program that's running the planet. It's really about, the current system is all about denying the body. And in fact, we see this in many spiritual traditions. Like, the body has to be overcome. It has to be, whatever, beaten into submission. The body is a block to spirituality and realization. And yet in our tradition, we understand that the expression of the body is the feminine expression in life. So just really tie that, like, how the patriarch is override the body, and the feminine wisdom is honor and embrace the experience of the physical form, and to live in balance and harmony with our physical reality, as opposed to trying to override it or overcome it. And then how much wisdom and healing and beauty there is when we honor our nature, our human nature.
Right. I love that. And actually, as you're saying that, it also makes me think, I feel like at the blueprint level, or at the ideal level, the patriarchal version of things would be to serve embodiment, to listen and receive from that cosmic source, and that stillness of masculinity, and say, oh, this is what's happening in front of me. I can see it, and this is how I'm called to serve, and aid the process of this embodiment happening with more ease, with more comfort, with more support, with more resources. So I think that's how those things can connect. Obviously, like, patriarchy and masculinity can get a bad rep, but there's a blueprint to everything. So
and there's a healthy blueprint in a toxic expression, right?
Yes.
So like, I am a firm believer that the core human blueprint is love. Like, our core human blueprint is health, connection, love, beauty. That's the core human blueprint, and everything else is trauma.
Yeah, right. So back to, everybody's got a little trauma, because we aren't all living all in love. That's for sure.
No, definitely not.
Myself included.
Yeah.
I do my best.
Yeah. Well, we all have wounds, Yeah. Yeah. Yay. Okay. So let's talk about boundaries as a gateway to bliss, because this is kind of counterintuitive for some people. It's like, well, if I'm not supposed to say no, I'm being liberated. Sexual liberation means that I say yes to everything, right? So boundaries, how can that be a gateway to more sexual bliss? So tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, so archetypally speaking, healthy boundaries are the second archetype, sovereignty, and the archetype is the gatekeeper. And I like, speaking of masculine and feminine, to think of these two different ways that boundaries can embody. And the first would be more of the feminine, where we open to that which we feel like will feed and nourish that initial soul seed, that youngest part of ourselves. So we say, oh yeah, this feels like it's going to provide something yummy, nourishing, life-giving to my whole system. I'm opening to that. And it's not just to my pussy, it's to my wholeness. This is going to nourish all of me. And so I can say yes to that. I can open to that. Or like, no, if I open to this, if I let this in, there's going to be something toxic or something, unhealthy that gets into my system, right? This is actually going to detract from the health of my wholeness. And so that's sort of like this feminine opening or closing according to what's going to regenerate your entire system. And I'm sure you teach this, but sex is medicine.
Yeah.
Well, sex is only medicine if it isn't poison.
Exactly.
So how do you determine if it's medicine or poison?
Yeah.
Well, is it going to regenerate? Regenerate meaning add more life to the cycle of your life, all of you. Is it going to regenerate your sense of emotional safety, your sense of your identity being valid and valuable? Is it going to regenerate your heart? Is it going to regenerate your clarity? Is it going to give you a sense of empowerment? Is it going to connect you more to the divinity of life? Or is it going to take away from any of those things? And if it is, why are you willing to have sex take away from your wholeness? And often it's because we don't know that we could have sex that contributes to the awakening of all of us. And we don't know that because it's not modeled, because we live in a culture, again, that's extractive, that's exploitative, that doesn't honor us. And, you know, it's baked into the soil. So it's not a small job. And this is why this idea of reblooming sexuality, well, you got to really rebloom everything. We got to rebloom our food. We got to rebloom our systems. Like, I think that healthy sex bloom, like sex is like a litmus test for culture.
Yeah.
How is the sexuality doing? Mm-hmm. Same with the pollinators, right? That's why sex and pollinator are the same archetype. Guess what we have in our culture right now, or in our ecosystem?
The bees are dying.
Pollinator collapse. Yeah. So it's this litmus test for the health of the whole system.
Yeah.
And so you can be part of a fractal change in our culture by saying, I want sex that regenerates all of me, that actually awakens my medicinal self. Yeah. Because I am a medicine keeper and medicine maker on this weird planet at this time. I'm claiming that for myself, and I want sex to be part of how I come into the fullness of who I am.
Yeah.
So that would be the feminine part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Holistic view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the masculine sense of boundaries, which people don't really think about. We think either I'm saying yes or I'm saying no, but there's this penetration. I'm moving toward, I'm saying, I'm penetrating that, because that really, I can serve the life, that life force. I can add to that my life, my wholehearted life, not just my turn on, not just my ego, not just my greed, but my wholehearted life force can contribute to this thing. I can fully say yes. I can fully penetrate this thing with my vibe, with my energy, with my vitality. Or, you know what, if I penetrate that with it's really kind of half-hearted. I'm just kind of doing it to get off. It's not really it's not fully, your full medicine isn't there. It's junk food. Yeah. Okay. So the masculine boundary is hanging back. I don't need to put my energy there. I don't need to waste my time. I don't need to send false messages. I don't need to have half-hearted commitments. I can hang back. I can put my life force where I am fully, wholeheartedly invested and hang back from everything else. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that analogy, because that is, I've gotten so many questions of like, well, how do I deal with usually for men, right? How do I deal with being attracted to this person or that person? It's like the experience of being attracted, it's like it automatically means in their minds that they have to do something. They have to penetrate, right? They have to move the energy. And I'm like, well, how about you just sit and be present with it and enjoy the bubbles and the effervescence of feeling attraction, and just be present with that and allow it. Right? As opposed to having to bring it out or suppress it. And that's the duality of our society. It's either we have to bring out or we have to suppress. We can't just be with.
Right. Yeah. And then that gives you a little bit of time to sense, wow, if I put my energy here, again, in that same question that you would ask with the feminine, would it regenerate me? Yeah. Would it make me feel like I've done something very worthwhile? I've honored somebody. I've expressed part of my heart. I've contributed to a shared vision. I've created more empowered choice and vitality. Would it really regenerate your wholeness to penetrate? Or does it just get one part of you, but the rest of you is left out of the picture? Yeah. And, we're in, again, a very fractured culture, and we feel that in our own bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of very often that is kind of the blueprint of the society. Like we talk about the grind culture and the commodified and all of that very I refer to it as yang, that very yang driven, like go, 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 without the yin, the receptive, the softening, the being, the presence. Right. And so that's a very structural, it's wired into all of us from the time we're children, from our upbringing, to just be that driving without taking a moment to pause and reflect and contain and be present with, as we just described. Yeah. And how medicinal that would be for our entire society. And maybe that's what this virus is doing for some of us, who choose to spend our time being present with that reality, is that it's giving us a clear directive and imperative to take that time to pause and reevaluate and assess, as opposed to just go, 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 because we can't. Literally, we can't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really funny. Right before the virus happened, or like about a week or so before, I was doing this spell, this ritual with my roommate.
Uh-huh.
And I have this anything's possible potion bottle. And
Mm.
we made this potion. And she went first and she did this whole thing. And then she asked me, well, what do you want to do? And I like lied down on my couch, sort of like fatigued. And I just had this feeling like the whole human family needed a nap.
Yeah.
I was like, we're all tired.
Yeah.
And that was my spell. I was like, I want the whole human family to take a nap all at the same time. And then like a week later, COVID happened.
It's your fault, Rachel.
Which burned me. No, but I think that might have been an unconscious wish on a lot of people's hearts. And I think this has definitely been, I don't want to, there's so many difficulties, right? Like including not being able to do anything or not being able to connect with people that can be deeply triggering around attachment wounds, around trauma. Like there's so many ways that this is a very activating time.
Yeah.
Right. Like the definition of dysregulation would be feeling and experiencing both hyperarousal and collapse. So like, oh my God, I'm in danger. This isn't safe, but I'm also frozen and can't do anything. So I think it's been hard to have that regulated rest for a lot of people during this time because it's so triggering. But for those of us who've been able to find glimpses of that regulated rest, I definitely agree. It's been a time of a lot of discernment and streamlining and kind of like making the circles smaller. Mm-hmm. And everybody who stays in the circle are like the people you really want there. And so there's something meaningful about that too.
Yeah, it is, it's both, right? It's not good, it's not bad, it's both.
It's a lot of things, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, all of the above. Yeah. So I'm so curious, breaking the collective sexual trauma spell, why your personal sexual healing is political. I would love to end on that note because that is so huge. Yes, so I'll just let you talk.
Yeah, so I'm sure many of the listeners may have heard of a woman named Adrienne Maree Brown. You know Adrienne Maree Brown, yeah?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, well, be prepared to have your heart and mind and soul blown open. I love Adrienne Maree Brown. She's one of my favorite thinkers of our time. She wrote a book called Emergent Strategy and another book called Pleasure Activism.
Oh, yes. Okay, so someone was just sharing with me to look at pleasure activism. So yes, there we go.
Yeah, I actually think I prefer Emergent Strategy. It's like pleasure activism, they're both great. But in Emergent Strategy, there's like a handful of concepts that are essentially ways of moving through the world in this sort of apocalyptic world. Like how do we actually regenerate and possibly like survive and thrive through all of these different collapsing things. And one of the philosophies is, or one of the words is fractal. It's like the fractal nature of things, meaning that what you do to yourself, you do to the world. Or even like with a dandelion, like you think you got to be big, but small is all. And what happens in our own bodies, so many of the experiences we're having in our bodies, from anxiety to depression to numbness, they are mirror neurons of the experience of the earth. And actually, if we want to get really nerdy, there's this element called silica, which is in the body of the earth. It's in the crust of the earth. And it's also in our human body, and it's also in bees. And it's this element that senses, that it's like connected to being able to sense what, the somatic experience of something.
So hair, right?
Yeah.
Comfrey and horsetail.
Yes. So it's this perceptive sensory element. Mm-hmm. And it's shared across all of these different creatures and living things. And it's this part of us that it's sort of like the sixth sense in us, the part that has that spidey sense, but also the part that's connected to the causal plane, which is like the bigger rising and falling of things. It's how birds flock together. It's how a lot of magic happens, right? And it's part of us, and it's part of the earth, and it's part of the bees. We all have it. We all share it. And so anytime that you, as one human, actually come into coherence, come into alignment with your natural blueprints of health, with worthiness, with receptivity, with healthy boundaries and sovereignty, with co-creation as opposed to colonization, with this sense of cooperation with the natural intelligence of your system, you are like lighting up a piece of this interconnected web, which is the blueprint of all of life. Like, you are lighting up the wellness. And I think especially with sexuality, because orgasm and sex is how life regenerates, and it's pleasurable. Like, you can just imagine anytime you're having sex that is honoring of your life force, and that honor, whether it's sex with yourself or sex with another, anytime it's like the same act as when a bee pollinates a flower and then cross-pollinates that pollen into another flower and regenerates the biodiversity of, the garden. Like, you are participating in something that makes beauty on this earth. However, on the other hand, if you are participating in sexuality, which sexuality, again, it's that archetype that moves us through time. It's how the past becomes the future. It's through sex. That's how we live on. And so if in our process of evolution, we're actually embodying the imprints, the traumatic imprints of neglect, exploitation, shame and repression, manipulation, control, violence, addiction, isolation, alienation, colonization. If we're embodying these things in our extraction, force, then we're perpetuating, you think about the crops that we monocrop, and then we kill the soil, and then the diseases come to the soil, and then we have to add the pesticides, and then the pesticides give us cancer, and it's this negative feedback loop. Like, we don't want to be a part of that. And literally, how you do sex is an embodied, energetic expression of what world you're a part of. So you can be part of co-creating a more beautiful world. And you deserve it for you. And every time you say yes to really deeply honoring those blueprints, you are creating a more positive momentum on our planet.
Wow. Yeah. So your practice has these ripple effects, global ripple effects. How beautiful that is. Changing the world one orgasm at a time.
Why not? Right? I mean, that's a pretty worthy endeavor. If we're going to approach it in some way, might as well be through orgasms.
It's fascinating you shared that, the interconnectedness. I love that. And something that comes to mind for me is I'm studying Tibetan medicine, and they talk about the different levels of mind. And there's like the ordinary mind, the subtle that lives in the intellect, the subtle mind that lives in the heart, and then the very subtle mind that lives in your genitals. And your very subtle mind carries the memories and the imprint of every life you've ever lived and every life you will live. And to me, this speaks to what a requirement it is for us to do that sexual healing and have that sexual healing, so that we are shedding literally wounds and memories and traumas from previous lifetimes, and then not carrying them forward, talking about breaking the cycle. Right?
Wow. That's so beautiful. That gave me chills. And also, tell me if this is accurate, because or from what you're learning and studying, like, my sense too, as you share that, is like, as you heal the deep root sexual pieces, it ends up also trickling up, like, into the heart and then into the mind. And it has this bottom up.
Exactly. It is the core and the root. And my understanding is, in the way the energy body and the physical body form in Tibetan medicine, is that the consciousness comes in. The first thing to form is the central channel, and then the spine, and then the heart, and then the genitals, and then the brain. And so the genitals supersede the brain. So for any kind of rewiring to be completely effective, the genitals must be included.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. I love the interlocking pieces.
Me too.
I can't wait to read your book. When is it coming out and where can we get it?
Well, I decided, speaking of not being part of extractive systems, that I would have no deadline.
Good.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. But right now, the print proof, I'm waiting for it to come back to me. So it'll be the next month or two, and I'm just gonna it'll be born like it's born, like a baby. Like you can't force that thing out. So sometime we're in August, probably in September, maybe October, and it'll be available at rebloomtogether.com.
Okay, I was going to ask where we can sign up for updates.
Yeah, well, you can head to rachelmaddox.com right now, or rebloomtogether.com is about to be finished. And yeah, there's the book you can find. There'll be a free coherence class that'll actually be working with the soul seed and the gatekeeper, so you can get some experiences working with those two archetypes if that was meaningful and interesting to you.
Yay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been so enriching.
Yes, so delightful.
So delightful. And anytime you want to come share with our audience, please let me know, because we'd love to have you back.
Oh, I'm just so glad we got to reconnect. It was really fun. And yeah, sending a lot of love to everybody who's listening. These are very wild and weird times. Yeah. We're going to get through it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This was just a beautiful episode, and I'm so glad that you got to benefit from her incredible wisdom. So make sure you go over to our website, rachelmaddox.com, and sign up for updates. I'm going to be up. I really want to read that book. Can't wait. Have a beautiful night, everyone, and we'll see you next week.